The summer evening of June 9, 1959, began like any other for 14-year-old Stephen Truscott at Clinton Air Force Base in southwestern Ontario. The sandy-haired teenager was known around the military community as a polite, quiet boy who helped his neighbors and excelled at track and field. As the sun began to set over the rural landscape, Stephen offered to give 12-year-old Lynn Harper a ride on his bicycle to Highway 8, where she claimed she wanted to meet her father. It was a simple act of kindness that would transform his life into a nightmare lasting nearly half a century, making him the youngest person in Canadian history to face execution. When Lynn Harper failed to return home that night, her frantic parents contacted the Royal Canadian Air Force Police, launching an immediate search of the base and surrounding countryside. Stephen was among the last people to see Lynn alive, having given her a ride partway to the highway on his bicycle, a fact that would soon place him under intense scrutiny. The military community, normally accustomed to order and discipline, found itself gripped by fear as search parties combed through the dense woodlands surrounding the base, calling out Lynn's name into the darkening Ontario night. 2 days later, the search ended in horror, when Lynn Harper's body was discovered in a wooded area known as Lawson's Bush, roughly 200 yards from the county road. The young girl had been sexually assaulted and murdered, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit military community and beyond. The Royal Canadian Air Force Police, under enormous pressure to solve the case quickly, focused their investigation on the teenagers who had seen Lynn on the evening she disappeared. Stephen's bicycle ride with the victim made him a prime suspect. Despite his consistent story and the lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime, the investigation that followed would later be criticized as a textbook example of tunnel vision in police work. Rather than exploring multiple possibilities, investigators became fixated on Stephen Truscott, building their case around his alleged opportunity and proximity to the victim. The court later stated that police tunnel vision is a feature found in many miscarriages of justice when examining Stephen's case decades later. Investigators dismissed witness testimony that could have supported Stephen's alibi and failed to pursue other potential suspects, including adults who had been in the area that evening. On June 13, 1959, just 4 days after Lynn Harper's disappearance, Stephen Truscott was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest of a 14-year-old boy for such a heinous crime created a media sensation across Canada, with newspapers struggling to comprehend how someone so young could be accused of such violence. Stephen's parents, Bob and Doris Truscott, watched in disbelief as their son was taken into custody, protesting his innocence, while legal experts debated whether a child could face the death penalty under Canadian law. The trial that began on September 19, 1959, in the small town of Goderich, Ontario, was unlike anything the Canadian legal system had ever seen. A jury heard the case and found Truscott guilty just 2 weeks later. And despite the jury's call for mercy, the law required that Truscott receive the death penalty. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of children, some as young as 13, whose memories of that June evening were inconsistent and contradictory. The defense, hampered by the limited resources available for legal aid cases, struggled to present alternative theories or challenge the prosecution's timeline effectively. Convicted of murder at age 14, Stephen became the youngest person ever to face the death penalty in Canada, a distinction that highlighted the severe flaws in a legal system that could condemn a child to execution. The judge's sentencing sent shockwaves across the country, sparking intense debate about juvenile justice, capital punishment, and the reliability of evidence in criminal cases. Legal experts, child psychologists, and ordinary citizens questioned how a 14-year-old could be held to the same standard as an adult defendant in such a serious matter. The death sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. But this small mercy did little to ease the burden on the Truscott family or address the growing concerns about the case among legal observers. On January 20, 1960, the Ontario Court of Appeal dismissed Truscott's appeal of his conviction. And shortly after, the Supreme Court of Canada dismissed his request for leave for a further appeal. Stephen spent his teenage years behind bars, maintaining his innocence while the world moved on, seemingly content with the swift resolution of a horrific crime. Throughout the 1960s, however, questions about the case continued to surface. Journalists, legal scholars, and concerned citizens began examining the evidence more closely, finding numerous inconsistencies and procedural errors that had been overlooked during the rush to judgment. A special reference to the Supreme Court of Canada led to the case being re-examined in 1966. However, the Supreme Court ruled that his case had been justly decided, dealing another crushing blow to hopes for Stephen's exoneration. The ruling seemed to close the door permanently on any chance of overturning the conviction. Truscott was paroled in 1969 and disappeared into anonymity, living under the media radar in Guelph, Ontario, for almost 30 years. He adopted a new identity, married, raised children, and built a quiet life while carrying the weight of a wrongful conviction that had stolen his youth and branded him as a killer in the eyes of society. His wife Marlene became his strongest advocate, working tirelessly behind the scenes to research the case and build support for his exoneration. Even as Stephen himself often seemed resigned to living forever under the shadow of his conviction. The turning point came in 2000 when an interview on CBC, television's investigative news program The Fifth Estate, revived interest in his case, along with a subsequent book by journalist Julian Schur, suggesting that evidence in favor of Truscott's innocence had been ignored in the original trial. The documentary presented compelling new evidence and expert testimony that challenged virtually every aspect of the prosecution's original case, from the flawed timeline to the questionable medical evidence that had been crucial to his conviction. Public support for Stephen Truscott began to build as more Canadians learned about the serious flaws in his case. Legal experts, forensic specialists, and former prosecutors publicly questioned the conviction, while advances in criminal investigation techniques revealed how primitive and unreliable many of the methods used in 1959 had been. The documentary suggested that Harper's real killer may have been Alexander Kolochuk, a Royal Canadian Air Force officer who had been in the area but was never seriously investigated by police. The legal battle for exoneration took several more years, but momentum was clearly building. In 2004, the federal government agreed to pay for Stephen's legal costs in pursuing his case. And in 2006, the Ontario Court of Appeal began hearing arguments for his acquittal. The case had evolved from a forgotten miscarriage of justice into a symbol of everything that could go wrong in the criminal justice system: tunnel vision, inadequate legal representation, unreliable evidence, and the rush to judgment that had nearly cost an innocent boy his life. On August 28, 2007, 48 years after his conviction, the Ontario Court of Appeal unanimously overturned that conviction, declaring the case a miscarriage of justice and acquitting Truscott. The Ontario government later paid Stephen Truscott $6.5 million for suffering a miscarriage of justice, living 48 years with the stigma of being wrongfully convicted of a rape and murder he did not commit. The compensation could never restore his stolen youth or erase decades of living as a suspected killer, but it represented society's acknowledgement of a terrible wrong. Today, Stephen Truscott's case stands as one of Canada's most significant wrongful convictions, leading to reforms in how the justice system handles cases involving minors and improvements in police investigation techniques. Lynn Harper's murder has never been solved, a sobering reminder that the rush to convict an innocent boy may have allowed the real killer to escape justice forever. Stephen's story serves as a powerful testament to the importance of presumption of innocence, thorough investigation, and the dangers of allowing public pressure and emotional reactions to override careful analysis of evidence. His 48-year battle for justice changed Canadian law and demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit in the face of institutional failure, ensuring that his ordeal would serve as a safeguard for future generations of young people facing the criminal justice system. Stephen Truscott's journey from death row to vindication reminds us that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it is justice fighting its way through decades of institutional resistance to finally emerge into the light. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how quickly we rush to judgment, and how willing we are to believe that complex cases can have simple solutions, in a world where social media can turn suspicion into certainty within hours. Stephen's 48-year wait for justice serves as a crucial reminder that the truth often requires patience, persistence, and the courage to admit when we have gotten things terribly wrong. What strikes you most about Stephen Truscott's incredible journey from condemned boy to vindicated man? Do you think our justice system has learned enough from cases like his to prevent similar tragedies? Share your thoughts on wrongful convictions and legal reform in the comments below. And if this remarkable story of perseverance and ultimate justice moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to West is Best for more deep dives into the cases that shaped Canadian history and law. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the stories of ordinary people who faced extraordinary injustices and fought back against a system that had failed them.